And we are live, and I am fortunate today to be with the Guy Swan, the guy that knows or has read more about Bitcoin than anybody else you know. But I want to start out with just a disclaimer, as I always do, especially when we are talking Bitcoin in particular. I will never contact you for any personal information or private chat exchange or anything in the comments of a video stream ever. And if it has my logo, it doesn't mean it's me. And I don't use WhatsApp. So if it says hit me up on WhatsApp and I'll mine Bitcoin for you, it's a lie. With that out of the way, Guy, welcome to the Survival Podcast and the Bitcoin Breakout.
What up, man? Thanks for having me.
I'm sure you've seen that, right? Like it's
all the
thing
time.
Now. All the
Dude,
time.
All the time. People will send me, like, followers or whatever will send me DMs like, I thought you were messaging me and you were like trying to get me in this trading group. I was like, like, God doesn't trade. What the hell?
It has your logo or your avatar. You like, just like NFTs, anybody can right click and save as, right? Like, it's not hard. Dude, I'm so excited to have you on. I definitely want to get some of your backstory. And I want to kind of start out with that. Like, okay, let's go back to before Guy Swan is reading everything about Bitcoin he can find on the Bitcoin Audible podcast, and you don't know what Bitcoin is yet. What in your life leads you to a world to become completely obsessed by Bitcoin?
So I went to college for film, which growing up in like really small town America seemed like a ridiculous thing to do at the time. And but I was just fascinated with stories, and that was really, I think, was at the heart of libertarianism to me, and essentially Austrian economics as well, is that it explained things that made no sense to me previously. Like when I took economics, and actually while I was living with my brother after school, he was majoring in economics, and the Keynesian economics that you're taught in school is literally self-contradictory. Like so many times they will teach something in microeconomics and then something completely different in macroeconomics, and they literally can't be true at the same time. Like they just cannot both be true, but you're told to just kind of shut up and take it. And this is what happens when things get big, and this is what happens when things are small. And it's like, no, literally nothing in the world works that way. Like pressure and temperature doesn't work when you're talking about a big hurricane versus in a cup. Like it's the same law. It's the same thing. Economics is not any different. It's just more convoluted. It's just bigger, so it's harder to see. And that kind of drove me crazy. Like I a little bit like hated. I loved being a nerd, I was always techie and everything, but in that, I actually really loved the supply and demand curve when I took economics. My economics professor actually pulled me aside one day and told me I should major in economics. I was like, nah, dude, I'm doing film. This sucks. And, but the supply demand curve thing was super just flat intuitive to me. And so like when we were like taking a test or whatever, like you could just lay out like a scenario, like what happens if this was introduced into the environment? It's like, oh, well, sure. Like you just have the supply would get strangled and, you'd have a increase in price, blah, blah, blah. But outside of that, everything else around it seemed to be just like, this is the way the model works for the thing. And there wouldn't be any explicit reason why. I don't know. Like, something about the logic of it was just falling apart for me, and it didn't stick together right. And being somebody who loves the cohesive story, who will meticulously break down a film to each incremental movement and like incremental moment, that led to the ultimate satisfaction of the conclusion. Like I loved the details, right? And it just didn't do it for me. And Austrian economics suddenly just like things fit into place. You start from first principles, you start from like the axiomatic reality, like what can we absolutely know is true, what can we decide on that is objective, and then how does this relate to human nature and human interaction, and what happens when you extrapolate that? You end up deducing economics kind of like you deduce math. rather than looking at a bunch of data, which is always going to be so convoluted and isolated. It's like looking at like singular metrics about like the human body or whatever, and thinking you have an idea about what's going on, like that. Oh, just because I'm reading your cholesterol, well, these are all the things that are wrong with you, when the amount of complexity in the human body is staggering. Like, we really just don't know what the hell is going on. And economics is exactly the same way. It's so big, it's so convoluted. Like, the idea of a top-down structure of someone being able to point at, oh, well, here's a price and here's our aggregate demand for cars, and thus I'm going to just manipulate things, and I'm going to mess with the altimeter in the plane instead of actually correcting the plane. I'm just going to screw with all the gauges, and the gauges are going to tell us what we want it to say rather than what it actually tells us. And the plane's going to fly great. It's going to be wonderful. And
yeah, those two things don't go together. That's not how that works. You either correct what the plane's doing, or
you either respond to reality,
yeah,
or like you need accurate gauges, not gauges that tell you what feels nice. Like, it's just so that going down that whole rabbit hole, it just got me fascinated in Austrian economics. And that also reframed everything in tech for me, because everything up to that point with the internet was gaming, right? Like it was a toy. Yeah. It was something that was just neat in my world. And when I started to like dig into Austrian economics, like my brother and I, because we did this whole journey together. And my brother's Agorist View on Twitter, by the way. I'm not sure if you know him or if y'all chatted. But he's aggressive Bitcoiner anarchist, just like myself. But as we were both going down,
look him up.
yeah, check him out. He's fun. He's aggressively controversial on Twitter. It makes it very entertaining. So we're going down this rabbit hole together, and it reframed everything about the internet. Suddenly the internet, I recognized, was something that was like literally changing the world. This wasn't just like a computer I could build in my room. It's like, oh, I'm going to get a GPU with more stats and like the bigger number, and like I'm going to custom build it, and it's going to look fancy, and it's going to have a light inside of it, because whatever. Suddenly it was like, holy shit, this is disrupting industries. This is undermining the fundamental economic incentives of 100-year-old companies, incumbents, that cannot survive this transition. And then I looked at BitTorrent again, which was just a way to get free music at the time. And suddenly I was like, holy shit, this is like fundamentally, this is undermining the technological reality that the record labels and the legal structure and the copyright structure and the delivery structure of an entire market of media is refusing to accept. The world has changed. Technology is different, and they are refusing to accept it, and they think they're powerful enough and wealthy enough in order to prevent it from happening. And somebody wrote a few hundred lines of code and is tearing this entire system apart. That blew my mind. And somewhere in the middle of all that shit, Bitcoin landed. Bitcoin was the BitTorrent of money. There's a peer-to-peer network that couldn't be shut down, that undermined government money, that created its own unit of measurement, that had its own transaction rails and its own infrastructure, and was programmable, and embraced and codified Austrian economic principles. Like, that was it. Like, it was like the trifecta of everything that mattered to me at the time. And I was just down. I was down the rabbit hole, and I never came out. I've been stuck ever since. I don't even know. Is there anything other than the rabbit hole?
I live in the rabbit hole. I should make a new shirt. I live in the rabbit hole. Like,
I live in the rabbit hole. Oh my God, that's a good one.
I live in the rabbit hole.
Make that shit, and I will buy it. I will be your first customer.
So, like, for me, one of my moments was when I started taking Bitcoin for my membership. My membership's a $50 a year product. It's not very expensive. Mm-hmm. And back when I started the show back in 2008, I would get, I guess it was 2009 when I actually monetized it. So from 2009 to about 2013, I would get 10, not huge, 10, 15 orders a month that people would pay in the mail with silver coins, because there's a lot of the barter mindset. I haven't had an order for silver in the last 5 years. And I watched those orders go away, and then Bitcoin orders replace it and then exceed it. And I was like, so everybody that was using silver back then, they wanted this thing. They just didn't recognize it necessarily when it showed up. They wanted something that government couldn't reach into and touch and take. But metal has some really great values to it. It's why it worked for so long in so many different ways. But it is corruptible, and it is difficult to do business in, because not everybody's going to denominate things in ounces, but we can take sats to, infinite level, really, right? So when you could actually price something and actually take payment for it and then move that thing at the speed of light across electronically and then guarantee that both sides were safe. Like, I don't get any. The last barter deal I got was some guy gave me like 4 gallons of honey because I make mead, and I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. He was local, so he drove by and dropped it off.
That's a good deal. You got to take that.
That's a good deal, right? Yeah, like, this is awesome. But like, people have just like, then it is a unit of exchange, even if most people are hodling long term with the majority of the Bitcoin. But there's a lot of stuff wrong in the world, societal problems, political problems, and I think a lot of times anarchists, agorists, Bitcoiners, code bros, all that whole kind of group that they've lumped in as one group where it belongs, there are not libertarians. We get accused of like not caring. I think we care a lot and we want to do something. How do you think that Bitcoin addresses that as actually a solution rather than just another internet tool?
Wait, addresses what specifically as a solution?
Societal problems. Like,
okay,
like we always say, Bitcoin fix the money, fix the world. Like, how does that, is that a real thing, or is that just a meme that we came up with to get more people to buy Bitcoin?
No, that's a real thing. That's a real thing in so many ways. First, so, going back to the gauge analogy, actually, with the airplane, is that one of the purpose of money is to give accurate signals about the economy through an insanely dense aggregation of data that is not possible in any other way. Like, what the economy is and why the free market works is because I have some piece of knowledge that nobody else has. And that means I could be completely stupid, but that doesn't mean that my piece of information or knowledge is inaccurate, or that like I still don't have something that somebody else does. Just merely because I'm standing in a different place and I can see something from a different angle, I might know that, my friend down the street has, a whole bunch of, I don't know, a whole bunch of lumber after they built a house, and they just have it sitting in their garage and it's just left over, but nobody's using it. Now, if the price of lumber doubles in a few days, I might be like, man, I'm going to go hit that guy up and get his lumber. I'm going to actually cause market pressure in the reverse direction because I know about supply that nobody else knows about. And that same thing goes for knowing who to trust to take on a project. Like, I might know that you're a good worker, that you're going to actually, you've been doing this podcast for 14 freaking years. You're going to get some shit done, right? So like, I would trust you to be a part of some project or to work on something with me. And when things get down to the wire, like in a normal situation, I might just like grab anybody, right? When it's like no big deal. But when I'm like on a deadline or something serious, or prices are high, and like I need to get something done, I'm going to choose you. I'm going to choose somebody that I trust or somebody that I know, and that other person is not going to get the job anymore. I'm going to change where my economic activity goes. Now extrapolate that through my entire life, through every single thing that I do, through every transaction that I make day to day, through all of the weight of the skills of everything that I've read, of the people that I have come to know and trust in my life. I've extended that over my the course of my entire life to help me make intelligent, rational decisions about the stuff that goes on day to day. The economy and the price in the market is the aggregate of that mechanism for every single person. And all of the things that they know, and all of the people that they trust, and all of the extra pieces of wood that they know about when market prices change. And it's the aggregate of all of that interaction. It's like a supercomputer where every single processor has a unique perspective and a unique experience. And the market signal is the aggregate of all of that. The idea that we're going to take 2 to 3 people who are experts, who barely have a 1%, 5% at best advantage over just the normal ass human being. In fact, probably less, because they're just arrogant and they think they know. And they're going to they can convince themselves of something stupid because they're actually intelligent. Whereas a stupid person is just going to bang on things, and the thing that works, they're going to do. They don't care if they understand it. They're going to eventually stumble upon the correct answer. An expert can do something wrong for years and years and years and years because they're always intelligent enough to excuse it. So there's even an argument as to whether or not the expert really truly has an advantage of knowing what the correct decision is. But aside from that, it's not 1,000-fold, million-fold advantage, which is what the whole economy is. So if you have people manipulating the money, that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
You're replacing that supercomputer that allows the money to be stable. It allows it to be a rock-solid means of monetary stability, of supply stability, so that all of those interactions and the knowledge and the information of all of those people can be what dictates the price. They can be what informs the current state of economic reality. You're replacing it with a few people at the top who are arrogant enough to believe that they can play God and that they can just look at an economy of billions of people and just know what it needs and what everybody wants and the direction that it's going to go. It is the pretense of knowledge. It is the most painfully arrogant, I'm omnipotent, I will be God idea ever. And the only way it just causes destruction. It just causes destruction. It just causes misallocations. It just causes waste, unbelievable amounts of waste and inefficiency. And until we rip that ability away from them, until we find some sly, as Hayek says, some sly roundabout way to make their dictates and their attempts to control it irrelevant, we will be subject to all of the destruction that they cause. And when you fix the money, you have a real economy, you have a free market, and you can actually adjust and account for all of those things, and it will be stable and sustainable over the long term.
I think too, like with that, people get the wrong idea when we say something like that. I think we're talking utopian. I think what we're talking about basically is a
Just
fair shake.
proper
There will
incentive.
still be winners
Yeah,
and
there's no
losers.
such thing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
There will still be winners and losers, but at least you're basing your decisions on a known rather than the whims of what this person might do who's supposedly an expert. One of the coolest episodes I ever heard of yours was fairly recent. I think it was an old one you redid though, and it was on why like yuppies reject Bitcoin.
Yeah,
and
why the yuppie elite don't
that
understand Bitcoin or something like
they're
that.
too smart to understand it because it doesn't fit their worldview, and the worldview they have is working out really well for them. And right about the time I listened to it, I had Brian Harrington on from Choice, and
I love Harrington. Yeah.
He's a good dude, man. And we were talking about this, and I had this kind of epiphany right as we were discussing that episode of yours, that all these people that are supposed to be smart about economics, they should love Bitcoin. Because Bitcoin is to economic formulas what the speed of light is to physics.
Yeah.
Right? It is an economic constant to the last day, to the last one mined, to the cost of every fee, per the value of each trade. You know everything. And so you can actually measure economic models with a stick instead of measuring them with a freaking rubber band. Right? Because that's what the Federal Reserve's job is to make monetary supply and inflation an elastic component and an economic model that's supposed to bring certainty. So even when good economists, good CFOs, good CEOs, even if the news is bad, just entrepreneurs, we always prefer a known versus an unknown in making plans for, like, do I hire? Do I take out more financing? Do I invest in this or that, right? But if you take and put it in a total variable, everybody's blind, except the people that know, and then they have this disproportionate advantage over others.
Yeah. No, for sure. And like when you think about it in, like actually there's You talk about like it's not a utopia, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's just kind of a straw man of how people take the argument. The proper incentives does not equal utopia. The proper incentives means we can respond to reality.
Correct.
You know, it doesn't mean because we have an accurate idea of what the weather is, doesn't mean there won't be hurricanes. And in fact, like when I talk about this is one thing that I talk about, like how corporatism in the United States has obliterated the economy, is we've half socialized. We've socialized what is actually the most important part of the economy, which is losses. The reason a market works is because of profits and losses. And losses is half of the equation, is who loses and how do we make sure that people are the actually wrong mechanisms, the actually wrong behaviors, the actual irresponsibility is what's punished, and the responsibility, the solvency, is being rewarded. What we have done in the United States is decided that risk is bad and losses are bad. And so because we just want to stay away from the things that we fear, we're just going to cover up one half of the equation. We're going to paper over it. The government is going to come in and subsidize everybody who's losing money. They're going to bail out everybody who was irresponsible and insolvent. And we're still going to let profits stay privatized. Well, what do? You turn into profits become just this permanent greed and speculation. It gets poisoned because it has no counterbalance. It's like profits become the only thing because losses no longer exist. So your irresponsible behavior is bailed out. When the banks are insolvent and they leverage themselves 40-1 with customer deposits and they can't pay anybody back, and we have a multi-trillion-dollar collapse in the economy, and then they get bailed out, what happens? The behavior doesn't go away. In fact, all of the banks that didn't do it are now like, well, shit, why didn't I do it?
Why didn't we do it?
They profited massively off of this.
Yeah.
The loss is what cleans house. The loss is what pushes people back away from the greedy profit of like, I'm just going to sell bullshit. I'm just going to leverage the customer deposits, because you look out in the future, you're like, oh, wow, yeah, this is going to kill me. This is going to destroy my life. This is going to ruin my business. If it doesn't do that anymore, then they just run with it. You've got the Lady Liberty or whatever, or not Lady Liberty. What's the one with the justice, the weights?
Scales of justice.
Scales of justice. Thank you.
Yeah.
Like that's the free market. You've got profits on one side and you've got losses on the other. If you just remove this one, everything's just greed, speculation. Wall Street becomes a gambling toy. Like it's just a giant casino, and nobody cares about principles. Nobody cares about things actually working or not. Because why? Because the government's going to come in and make sure that I never have losses. They're going to subsidize me when I'm a newspaper and nobody wants to buy me anymore. Well, we'll just pay. We'll just give you a bunch of money to keep newspapers alive. Why? I don't know. Nobody wants them. It's just because that's sad. That's sad. It's like, well, what the these are resources. This is shit that people live or die by resources. It's scarce. You can't just throw human time. Like imagine if we figured out a way to save money, save 50% of every one of our days, like just an unbelievable amount of time that we got back. But what would it inevitably do? It would destroy some giant industry that was profiting or that was trying to help us with that 50% of time that we were losing. If you just subsidize them to prop them back up, you're just roundabout stealing all of that time back from us and throwing it back into the industry that was a complete and utter waste of resources because we fixed it. It's making us pay for a problem that doesn't exist anymore. And you have this huge imbalance that just died. The economy dies. Losses, recessions, like adjustments, and like the opening of reality. Losers are the most important part. They're the most important part. Somebody has to lose because 90% of the shit that we do is wrong. It's just wrong.
Yeah.
We're incompetent by nature. It's okay. We have to embrace that. We're going to lose from time to time. The thing is that we're supposed to learn something. We're supposed to learn that the thing that lost is the thing that we stop doing.
Don't do that, and I think we
and that's how we make progress. Like,
we
that's
want
evolution.
an environment where you can lose, but losing doesn't mean you lost forever. That would be about as good as you're going to get. You can't have an environment. So we have somebody in the chat here, and I'm sure they're just a good person that's worried about, well, what if there's a bunch of losers in the end? There will always be losers. Yeah. But the problem we have, and I think this is why people are asking, when you propose an alternative, they're asking for some sort of utopia or assume it. The two sides of our political dichotomy are constantly promising, if we just did everything our way, it would all be great. There would be no more losers. Everything would be
just perfect. A lie.
And that's not going to work. And it makes me think of a saying. I don't remember who originally said it, but I'm very fond of it. It's that the problem with learning by experiences is life first gives you the exam and then gives you the lesson.
Yeah.
Right. But that has to be able to happen. That has to be able to happen. If you, like, there's people that are literally born with an inability to feel pain, physically feel pain. And you'd think, oh, that's like a superhero power. No, it's an awful thing, because that person doesn't know their body's being damaged. So if they touch a burner on a stove, we touch a burner on a stove, shit, it hurts. They're sitting there while their hand burns, right? So they can do an immense amount of damage to themselves because of this condition. And like, basically that's what you're describing. If we put all this insulative buffer around every major economic entity that's out there, because if they get hurt, somebody else will get hurt, then they get to do all this damage and never feel it. But the internal damage, think of us, we're their internal organs. We get hurt, and the body of the giant is propped up forever with this miraculous, lack of ability to be harmed. They're too big to fail. So we must, keep the giant animated.
That's a great analogy. It's profit or reward without loss, or growth, economic growth without loss. Is like happiness without sadness, or comfort without pain. Like they just don't, it just doesn't exist. Happy, like, even in the context, like, it's relative, right? Is that you're only really happy one day because you know it in relation to sadness. Like, oh crap, there was a point that I had. That was a good analogy and it threw me off. I forgot what I was going to say. We'll keep going. I'll remember it in a second.
Guy Swan. I feel good about that. Now, so I got your app in to be on the show, and the title of it was Bitcoin and Freedom. And I'm like, hell yeah. Great, right? Can you talk about how you think freedom and Bitcoin are tied together? Because I think a lot of people don't believe that. And in my audience, I have like the gamut of preppers in the prepper space too, that some are like we need a bunker in the ground. And I try to talk those people off the ledge. And we get people that are just basically, I'm going to be prepared for life and design my lifestyle. And depending on which side of that spectrum you land on, you have, less and less faith in something like a Bitcoin, which I kind of think it should be the other way around. Like, because all the things that people say, it's like, well, that's why you shouldn't trust dollars. But I think there is a huge link between Bitcoin and freedom. Right. Yeah.
No, I totally agree. And it actually just reminded me of the point that I was going to make, is when, in the context of collective freedom, is the ability to secure freedom as a society versus as an individual. It's those individual defenses of freedom that, done in aggregate, done with your community, with the people in your life, that is what leads to collective freedom. And it's the same thing with rights, human rights, and all of that stuff. Like, people who think, oh, we should do this for the group and we should sacrifice the individual. No, the individual is the group. The group is the culmination of all the individuals. If you've sacrificed the rights or the life or the liberty of the individual to get something for the group, what you've done is you've sacrificed everything that allows the group to have life, liberty, and rights of any kind. Because you've destroyed the whole thing. You've destroyed the whole thing. Because the rights are to the individual. The group doesn't have a right. The group is a collection of individuals that either do or do not have rights. They do or do not have liberty. But the example, or the other analogy that I was thinking of, is that as politics becomes the dictates for what money is, as politics becomes the dictate of who gets subsidized, or who survives in the economy and who doesn't, who picks winners and losers, you don't end up in a society without winners and losers. You move from a society that has economic winners and losers to political winners and losers. Rather, in an economic system where people who produce economically either succeed, or people who destroy things economically, they take losses, they lose, right? In a political economy, whether or not you're producing or providing something for other people is just kind of thrown out the window. It's whether or not you have political power. And then you simply have access to the things that people are actually producing. And every single incremental step further and further to a political economy is less production, is the creation of less value, is fewer resources available, and more, who am I voting for? What's the law? What's the policy? Who's my best friend? I've got a cousin who knows a guy who knows that politician. I'm going to get a good contract. Like, it just, the economic side of it, and the economic side of it goes away. And that's the only side that feeds people. You can't feed people with political power. The only thing you can do is use political power to steal food from somebody in an effort to redistribute it somewhere. But there's no mechanism to create food. Getting political power has absolutely nothing to do with feeding somebody. In fact, just the opposite. If people are afraid they're not going to be fed, if you create a crisis, that's the best way to get political power, is to promise them that your power is the solution. The incentive of politics is to have permanent crises. Because if there's not a crisis, there's no reason for political power. If everything's working,
yeah,
why do we need, what's the importance to go scream and vote and protest and say, this is the guy that's going to fix everything? You have to create problems. Permanent problems are the fuel of government and political power.
I got this guy. His name is not sure, and he's going to fix everything in 2 weeks, right? I mean, like, that's literally the place we end up. But, you know, you're talking about scarcity. So this, I might have heard this on your show, either something you read or somebody you interviewed, but it was that you can either have scarce money or scarce everything else. That's really your two choices in life. You have abundant money.
Yeah.
You have scarce everything else, right? If you have scarce money, you have abundant everything else, because there's so much financial incentive to the production side that there will be more food because more people will grow more food, that there will be more energy because more people will produce more energy. And so you can either have scarcity of everything or you can have scarcity of money. And scarcity of money always seemed like a problem. And this was always a justification for inflation. Well, when there's more people and more stuff, we need more units of money. Without more units of money, how will we be able to have enough money in enough people's hands? Well, with something you can push out to 8+ decimals, it's so instead of this kind of fractional reserve, I look at Bitcoin and I call it cap and fractionalize. So we can have as many, like a sat can be $1 someday. Right?
Oh, yeah.
God willing, right? You know,
Yeah.
but like
Any day now.
Fractionalize a sat at that point, right? So there's no scarcity of units, but there is a cap on the total supply, and therefore everything else can work. Because, you know, I did a lot of work in permaculture over the years as well, and I've done talks where I've talked about abundance mentality and what abundance brings, and what scarcity brings is war. Yeah. So like if you go back thousands of years, there were men who stabbed and beat and killed other men over salt.
Yeah.
Right. There were wars fought over pepper, salt and pepper. Men spilled the blood of other men for salt and pepper. That doesn't happen now. Why? Because we have new technologies and there is no problem procuring salt and pepper. There's no need for conflict because there's an abundance. And if you need salt, then you go get a job and you buy some freaking salt. Right? Or you go do something of value and you get some salt. And that's not utopian. That doesn't mean everybody will have everything they want. What it means is that we'll have enough production that people who try harder in our meritocracy can procure what they're looking for.
Yeah. It's funny. The solution to everything is wealth and prosperity for the individual. Like it's so ridiculous. Like environmentalism is so backwards. I mean, not to mention that just kind of on its face, it's this kind of anti-human thing in the very political sense these days. Like there are still real environmentalists out there. But the political environmental movement is a disaster. But their whole idea is that we're going to make everybody poor to stop using energy and we're going to clean everything up. I'll tell you right now, there is nobody who gives a shit less about the environment than a poor person. Like poverty is the environmental disaster. Like far and wide, it is the environmental disaster. Like people in India, they don't the poor in the third world countries and in the developing countries that have not kind of broken through that threshold yet to kind of the modern economy. They're the ones who shit in the rivers. They're the ones who they're desperate to get any sort of it's just trash. It's just like they can't even build structures for their houses. They are worried about whether or not they can eat in 4 hours, and rightfully so. Rightfully so. They should not worry about the environment. Wealth is what makes you care. Nobody in 1800s was having candlelight vigils over a glacier. Nobody, or over poverty or over child labor. These things were normal parts of life. And if somebody complained about the environment, it's like, I don't care. I'm hungry. I don't care. My family is going to die next winter if I don't have enough fuel to keep us warm. Poverty is the environmental disaster. It is only after you create a degree of prosperity and wealth that people wake up and they go, wow, I'm actually having consequences. I actually have externalities for the things that I do. I should actually adjust. And I have this property. I should take care of it. I own something in the world. Let me make it nice. Let me make it clean. And it's crazy. It's crazy. If we don't fix the money, all of that stuff is just going to stay misaligned. The incentives are going to stay in the wrong direction. And we're going to have this ever trend towards in the wrong direction. I mean, I think there's a lot of correcting forces just because of the technology, but the money is at the heart of all of it. The money is the power of the modern world. You can't do anything without money. Nothing at all. What can you do? What have you ever done that you literally did by yourself completely? That you didn't need a tool that somebody else made, that you didn't need a material that somebody else dug out of the ground. And what did you get with that? You got money. You used money to get
money
that.
to buy it. Yeah.
The ability to manipulate money is economic omnipotence. It's the ability to buy and consume any and all resources that exist anywhere without ever contributing anything yourself to the economic system.
The ultimate rent-seeking behavior,
It's
right?
the ultimate
that
power.
really is.
It's the
You
ultimate
control
power.
money.
It's God. Yeah.
I say it's the One Ring, right? The One Ring from the Lord of the Rings trilogy, right? It is the ultimate power. And that's I want to talk a little bit about Bitcoin maximalism next. And it's what I've come up with as to why there really are 800 bazillion useless cryptocurrencies. Because especially now with advances on the Lightning Network and all what can be done with Bitcoin, these guys come out with a tech that doesn't exist, but they need a token to fuel the tech. So we're going to make this thing. It's going to be a distributed VPN or whatever. So make the thing and then sell the thing. But no, they don't do that. They come out with a token to pre-sell the thing. Then they cash in on the token and they go away. And to me, that's where a lot of this stuff comes from. I think there's some projects out there, that are kind of well-meaning, that were done with, no pre-mine, no founders reserve. They're not as bad. But I think that in the end, it's very difficult for somebody to resist the ability to print money. So let's say I mean well. I'm going to build the Brave browser, which, by the way, is a great product. I'm talking to you through it right now. But, they came out with the basic attention token, and they sold $35 million worth of it on their IPO or ICO before they made it illegal to do it that way. So they were one of the last ones to get through. And they built a good product. They're one of the rare exceptions that did one of these things, and then they built a thing and it did the thing they said it was going to do. If I'm that person and that power exists, it's very hard. And so what keeps you a maximalist? Because you are a Bitcoin maximalist. A lot of people say it means you're in a cult, right? Do you think it's a cult, or do you think it's just an admission that this is the purest form of money we have?
I'm a Bitcoin maximalist because of economics and network effects.
Okay.
That is everything that I have learned in that regard. All of the principles, I think, just align to the fact that monetary pressures coalesce. They converge heavily so. Same is true of network protocols in particular. We might use a different browser. I could be on Chrome. I'm actually on Brave. But I could be on Chrome, like we could be on multiple social medias, right? Like, and
Yeah.
those have strong network effects. Those have
Yeah.
strong network effects, but they don't have total network effects. You can still use Facebook. I can still use Twitter, whatever it is, but we're both using TCP/IP. We're both communicating with the same protocol. And I think people discount how deep, how base some of these technologies are. And there is nothing kind of more base than money. Money is literally the foundation of all of it. Now, also, monetary shifts happen insanely slowly, like incredibly slowly. Like the shift from literally glass beads to gold along the African coast took a century. It literally took a century for like the currency of um, uh, some of the major currencies of the African continent to essentially be fully demonetized.
Okay.
Money is incredibly slow moving because it is the base layer. And just like you're talking about, is that like all these projects, I do agree that some of them, at least some of them, are well intentioned, but it's just too easy. And I know it's too easy because I even considered it myself. Like, it's too easy to see somebody copy and paste something and make a token, spin up $100 website with some cool graphics they got off of Fiverr, and, just change some shit in a white paper and post it and make millions and millions of dollars. And people have been doing this for years with no real project. And even so, like the basic attention token, the BAT token is a great example because it's got nothing to do with Brave. It's got absolutely. Really. It's not like they're even trying to support some infrastructure or incentivize people to run nodes or have a decentralized storage unit thing for Brave users. No, it's nothing. They just sold a token. They just made a spreadsheet and put a bunch of points on it and sold it for money. Who could possibly turn that down? It's very hard not to just do that when you think I could even be anonymous.
Yeah.
You have to like really, you have to be able to sleep at night. There's a party that has to know that, like, you're considering that purely for money's sake. You just want somebody else to do the bag holder. You don't want to produce any economic value. You just want to sell the token and get wealthy. And if you recognize that that's what it is, you just know you're not going to be able to pull it off. Like, you're just going to feel guilty, and I'm like, that's why I would never do it. Back in 2017, I considered, I was like, there could be a reason to do this. And I tried to justify it. I'll do a project. There's so many cool things that you could build with this. But then you just go like, man, I'm gonna feel like a jackass forever. Yeah. I'll have sold a shit coin for no reason, But the legitimate projects, I think they hurt for funds.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was this seemingly, one of the fascinating things that Bitcoin did was it funded infrastructure. Like with the idea of the time chain and the network, where the network itself paid people to put up network infrastructure. And so at the beginning, like back during the Namecoin days in 2012, I guess, was the first. When was Namecoin popped up? I don't know. It seemed like a brilliant idea to me. Like at the time, there was a lot of discussions about how you could use this infrastructure, this system, to create other things. And could you create it on top of Bitcoin? Did you have to create it on something else? And it took a lot of years to realize that this was just going to be a grifter's dream.
Yeah.
But Namecoin was attempting to do this with a DNS server, because who wouldn't want decentralized DNS? And so some of the earliest projects were actually half legitimate, in my opinion. Like,
I would agree. I did my share of Bitcoin, just to be open and honest. I really did. I made money on it too. I didn't make it the way you're talking, like rolling one out and capitalizing, but I've bought and sold at the right time or what have you. But my disclaimer with that is always, if I had just kept every site I ever bought and never did any of that, I'd be ahead. I'd be ahead.
Yeah. 2017 was the last time I traded shitcoins, and I did great. Oh God, I did great during the bull run, and then I got obliterated.
Yeah,
like as soon as it turned around,
get wrecked, and then you learn.
Why did I do this? Like, and I kind of knew,
the test.
there was that little guy in the back of my mind that was like, you're gonna get burned so bad. You're screwing yourself. So
life gave you the test, and then it gave you the lesson. And we've all done it. The place I've always been more open, and I think even a lot of maxis is toward the privacy side of things, because there is a desire for privacy, but I think more and more is coming. I think that, Michael Saylor kind of like makes the analogy that Bitcoin's the biggest, fastest, quickest predator that's ever existed in the monetary goods space. It's like a lion the size of a T-Rex, and given time, it will eat everything. And even when I was into some shit coins, I would always say, in the end, guys, that's all gambling. Bitcoin will probably eat everything. And so there's a lot of tech being developed right now. Lightning is incredibly exciting to me. A lot of things on Lightning. Oh, yeah. What are your thoughts? What do you think like the most interesting and important project or projects in Bitcoin are right now?
I think probably the next ones in line that I'm excited about are DLCs and discrete log contracts. This is a fancy way of saying contracts that, here's an example, just for simplicity, is the ability to have someone else's signature be the determining factor in something, even though they're not part of the transaction. So like, let's say you and me have a NFL does post an announcement that team A versus team B won, and they sign it and we're watching the game. Before the game, we put one whole Bitcoin into a multi-sig locked with the NFL signature, and you bet team A is going to win, and I bet team B is going to win. Well, when the NFL posts the answer to team A or team B, one of us gets the Bitcoin based on their answer, based on their signature. So they can be the arbiter of our contract without even having a clue that the contract occurs.
They don't even know they did it.
They don't even know it happened. And obviously gambling is just kind of like the simple example, but you can do all sorts of things. You can have, and this is how you can have market
commodities
discovery.
And future trading.
You can essentially have non-custodial trading markets. Like you can have non-custodial options contracts.
Yeah.
This is how you actually get DeFi. And then on top of that, you can build that on top of Lightning. Like you can do that within a Lightning channel and within Lightning payments. And Lightning obviously is the first major scaling model for Bitcoin. And I think it's going to be kind of, when I look out into the future as to what's going on or how Bitcoin will scale and kind of embrace all of the features and all of the bandwidth needed to accomplish everything that we dream Bitcoin will accomplish. I see it a lot like the internet. Is originally, like at the beginning of the internet, there was actually this explosion of alternative protocols and curated internet experiences where you would just connect to some server, and then they would be your internet window, and they would just tell you what you needed to see, and they would advertise for you and like all this stuff. And it wasn't really the internet. It was the CompuServe network. It was what's the other one? Big one. I can't remember the
AOL.
But AOL, yeah, there was AOL. Yeah, like that was another one. And even like IPv4 is the standard IP address system that we still use today, and IPv5 was an attempt to build in streaming, like redesign it so that the base layer, so that the IP address system would actually accommodate streaming in a different way than normal stuff. And I think it was actually John Postel, who's really great. He was the one who kind of like kept the layered architecture and the proper engineering mindset to the internet. And he even made a comment about it, like saying like we're really violating the layers, the layered engineering model, and the way that you actually make something robust and secure. And IPv5 died. And then IPv6 was trying to solve the potential scaling problem, is that IPv4, the address space is basically tiny. Like we filled it up in like the mid 90s. Mm-hmm. Like we have way more devices on the internet than we actually have IP addresses for. But what did? We started aggregating them. We started having each address on the internet account for one device, 2 devices, 3 devices, and now we all have our own home network. That's why whenever you look up your IP address on your uh, uh, when you look on your home network or whatever, you're always 192.168.1. Blah. It's because all local networks have the same IP address space. But what you actually have is one router with one IP that's then splitting it into 10, 20, 253 devices on the local network. I think we'll do the same. I think we'll actually have a lot of the same scaling model in Bitcoin. Is that when you see one address, it will actually account for a whole small payment network. It will be an aggregate of 30 different people, of a family trust or something, you know. And what I've seen with like the Lightning security model, like how they do the channels so that you're actually not trusting your channel partner.
Justice,
and
right?
then you do that with like multi-sig, like collaborative multi-sig. Some of the designs and systems that are coming out, like it's so cool, and they're making it intuitive with things like Nunchuck. It's a wallet that I've been using a lot recently that I'm just kind of fascinated with, because it's like it's collaborative multi-sig, but just like other people, like in an encrypted chat. So you're just chatting, and then you can have funds that are like behind a 5 of 7 multi-sig with everybody involved. And you can be like, all right, we're going to send a transaction. This is our business, right? Like we've set up a little community thing, and we have funds together. And to make a transaction, you have to have 5 of the 7 people sign it. And you just post it in your chat. You're just like, this is a transaction. One person has signed it. Everybody check on it. And they're like, all right, do it. Let's go. And then they sign, it just ticks up until you broadcast. And it's like right in a little chat window. It's so cool. But with like systems like these, as these start to expand, and then you have DLCs, you have this huge payment net, like liquid high bandwidth from a context of like money, in a context of like how much Bitcoin is on it. Payment network in the Lightning network. Man, the amount of things that you're going to be able to do with it. And then there's like, oh God, there's some like shadow chains, which is a whole nother thing, but it basically takes the Lightning network security model and allows you to have complete program agnosticism. So it doesn't even matter what code you run on it. I would run a client with, it's like one of those things that like I can run a website online and I don't even have to broadcast it. I don't even have to let anybody know that I'm running a website, but I could give you the IP address and you could come to it, and it could just be a website for the two of us, period.
Yeah.
You can now do that with financial services with a model called shadow chains. We can actually do a non-custodial relationship. You run the software for the financial service. I run the software for the financial service. Has nothing to do with Bitcoin script. You know, I mean, it could be an Ethereum VP, oh God, what do they call it? The machine, Ethereum machine, Jesus Christ, whatever. It could be some Ethereum smart contract. It could be a tiny Monero chain. It doesn't matter. It's completely agnostic to the programming. But if you're running the code and I'm running the code, and we get the exact same answer, the same output for the program, we can actually lock the funds to that output. So if we get anything different, if you get something different on your computer and I get something different on mine, there's not consensus between our two clients.
Gotcha.
Well, then you just get your funds back. You just wait for the time lock to go out, and essentially the agreement just never goes through because something was wrong. The program was wrong. It was a bug, or I tried to cheat you. But it had nothing to do with Bitcoin. Bitcoin has no idea. Bitcoin saw the hash of the program. And because of that, we can actually run any smart contract system, decentralized infrastructure, whatever the hell it is. Like what it's being used for right now is a Lightning liquidity marketplace. Is Lightning Labs is running one of these. And what you do is you lock up funds, you put your funds non-custodially into this marketplace, and they market make. They match buyers and sellers with, I need Lightning liquidity. I'm willing to pay 1% APY to have somebody open a big fat channel with me so that I can receive payments. And I want it for this span of time, right? And then somebody else makes an offer and says, I have liquidity. This is what I want the price. I want to open up a channel with you. You have to have this amount of liquidity, blah, blah, blah. And they match buyer and seller. Now, everyone's running the client. Everyone's running the software. Now, obviously, that market is not on the Bitcoin chain. It's not built out of Bitcoin script. Simply the output of the program is what's locking everyone's funds. So either everything goes through, buyer is matched with seller, Lightning Labs is an honest player, or the answer to everybody's program is not the same and nothing happens. Everybody just gets their funds back. That's non-custodial financial services. That's insane.
That is insane. And I know there's people out there going, that'll never directly pertain to me. It will, and you won't know it the same way. You don't think about the fact you're using TCP/IP right now to watch Guy and I have this conversation. It is the back end. And if it's running in Lightning, then we have to tie up liquidity, which just pulls more Bitcoin out of circulation and locks it up. That's like Lightning will be the ultimate hodler, right? Or some other layer. And this is what I've kind of like, I've had a lot of discussions with the Bitcoin Cash people and all this about like Lightning not being good because it's not on chain or what have you. And I'm like, then you don't understand how gold worked and ran the world for thousands of years. If you're going to say that, because you have Bitcoin as this base layer, which is exactly what it should be. And that means if we're going to spin up something like the Lightning Network, let's say Lightning had been an absolute disaster and didn't work. It would have meant nothing to Bitcoin. There'd be a lot of things that we can do with Bitcoin right now that we wouldn't be all excited about doing. But if Lightning had failed and, Guy Swan thing had been a competing idea and it had worked, then you've done nothing to harm Bitcoin. All the ideas about let's increase the block size and with the amount of transactions that go on Bitcoin, you do that. And in a few years, you'd be buying a 2 terabyte hard drive once a day to keep up if you took that approach. So by being conservative with the base layer and then saying, okay, you want something to do something that the base layer doesn't do by itself, you build a layer on top of it and you use this base layer unit we call a Satoshi as the funding mechanism, as the money in your system. Now people can go nuts. They can try anything. They can do anything, and failure can fail without risking this perfect entity that we have sitting underneath it. And it may not be perfect, but I'll call it perfect until you show me something better. So to me, in this instance, perfect isn't that it doesn't have any flaws. Perfect is it's as good as we can do right now. That's what perfect is for money. It's as good. Like gold was never perfect. And Bitcoin, I think Bitcoin's a better base money than gold. But there was a time in history where you couldn't make an argument that gold wasn't the most perfect thing, like a dimmer switch. The highest level of perfectness that we have attained was in gold. And I think that's kind of where we are with this. And I see all these layered technologies as very protective of Bitcoin. Allow the innovation, allow people to go nuts, and don't screw up the code. Satoshi said, like, once the first version of the code was there, it's done. Don't mess with it anymore.
Exactly. And what's funny is that, there's an element of what we want is the security of Bitcoin without needing to permanently store all of this data.
Correct.
But with Bitcoin, with the ownership model of Bitcoin, there's no way to get the monetary assurances without all of the data. And the whole point of Bitcoin being programmable is that you can leverage that security. You can leverage those monetary assurances. And what happens is Bitcoin becomes the ownership network. It becomes the giant, decentralized, can't be shut down, can't be compromised, incorruptible court for who owns what.
Correct.
With a decentralized payment network built on top of it. So the beauty of Lightning is that you don't have to broadcast all of your payments. Is that it's actually a great analogy going back to the internet. It's amazing how many models for thinking. Like if you learn how the internet works and how it's developed, how much you can extrapolate to be like, holy shit, this could really work for Bitcoin. This is a great way of thinking about how to accomplish these things. One of those things is the difference between Ethernet and TCP/IP. Is that Ethernet, I guess it's IP and TCP. Because you've got the routing, you've got the address protocol, the broadcast protocol, and then the routing protocol. And what that means is that, like, when you originally set up a network on the internet and you would connect your computers together, like when the university network was up and there was only like 10 devices or 20 devices in major universities, what would happen is that when you would broadcast a message, when you were trying to communicate with somebody on the internet, you would literally, it's like on your local network. You still do this on your local network. You just don't do this on the internet. You would blast it out to everybody. You would put a header that says this message, it's for this computer or this device specifically, and then you would just send it. You just push. You don't know where the device is. You're just flood it onto the network. And then every other device picks it up, checks the header. Is this for me? No, it's not. And if it's not for them, if it is for them, then they take it and they read it and they're like, oh, this is a packet that somebody sent me. If it isn't, then they check it and then they send it on to the next computer. And it would just flood the network. Every single computer, every device would get every single message in order to find out which message was for that one computer. That does not scale. That does not scale. Imagine if your phone had to receive every text message on planet Earth, check it and find out, oh, it's not, this text message is not my text message, and then reject them all to find its own text messages. We needed a routing protocol. And that's where the TCP/IP stack came in. We developed a way to route packets on top of that network where it only routed through the exact computers needed to arrive at its destination. So rather than me flooding my message out to every single computer everywhere, we would ping until we would ping just to find the other device. And then I would have a route. Like if you actually like bring up a terminal and you just do like TRC trace route to 8.8.8.8. I spelled it wrong. Well, whatever. If you just bring it up and you just do it on your computer, you can ping the DNS server for Google, and it will show you exactly which computers you went through. It'll show you your local ISP address. But the thing is you went through like 12 computers to get to your local hub, your neighborhood hub, your local hub, your ISP. You went through a trunk line to get to the regional hub in the middle of the country, and then you went to the trunk line to get to the other side of the country, and then back down the local hub ladder until you got to the server in Google. But nobody else got your message. You routed it to exactly where it needed to go. It officially became peer-to-peer, right? Bitcoin is the broadcast layer. When you make a transaction on the Bitcoin chain, you are taking that data and you are blasting it out to everybody in the whole freaking world, everybody on the Bitcoin network. The Lightning Network is the routing layer. What you're doing is you're allocating certain Bitcoin to a channel, and you're connecting to other entities, to other Bitcoin nodes with their channels, and you just ping to find a route to get exactly where it needs to go, so that you don't have to broadcast it. You don't have to store that information forever. And in doing so, you 100x, you 1000x the ability to fulfill payments by making Bitcoin the ownership layer and the liquidity layer for a decentralized payment network on top of it. And the payments don't have to be stored. They make it to their destination. You update the insurance contract. You update the state of the channel, and then you just delete it forever. You're done. You never need that payment again. Nobody has to store it on their hard drive.
Correct.
Like, it's just done. And if you want privacy, that's the only way you're going to do it.
Yeah,
right.
Because that all
goes the payments
away
off the chain.
Even like if you sniff out the node operators, that's all good and well, but you haven't sniffed out all the users of the nodes. That's gone. And I kind of look at it like my real low tech way to explain it is: imagine you go to a bar. And I'm there hanging out with Guy Swan and a couple other people. We're going to sit around and drink some scotch on the rocks and some other drinks, old fashions or something. We're going to spend some money. And the bartender says, well, how do you want to pay tonight? And I say cash. Well, he's going to be like, well, I don't know you and I don't know him and I don't know any of you people. So I need a credit card and I'll let you settle the bill in cash. So we and hundreds of other people in that same bar all give that bartender a credit card, and it sits there with our name on it, right? In this case, it would be just with a number on it. And we have our drinks, and then the end of the night comes, and then we settle. And when we settle, that's like those Satoshis leaving the Lightning Network and going back on chain. And they give us the bartender gives the credit card back. So I go up and I say, well, how much is it? And he says, it's $400. That Guy Swan drinks a shitload, And I said, well, I want to tip you too. I didn't know I was that deep into this, but I'm like, okay, I only have like $400 on me, and this is going to be like a $600 bar tab. Run it on the card. But one way or another, there was an assurance the settlement was going to occur.
Yeah.
And I think that should make people a lot more comfortable with it. And then
nobody could cheat anybody, which was the whole point.
Yeah, you can't cheat. If you do, that's why the liquidity's there. And I think they call it literally justice, where like you did something
the justice
unfavorable
transaction,
with your node, and then the liquidity is just taken away. And that covers the bar tab at the end, right? I think that, and then my other side of that though is right now anyway, for the average user, Lightning is for small transactions. So I also say, like, let's go back to the bar analogy. I'm not going to walk around with my entire Bitcoin stack on a Lightning wallet. I'm not going to do that, right? Maybe if I was running some big project, I'd push a bunch in there for liquidity. But as an average user, I'm not going to. So I'm going to keep about as much in a Lightning wallet as I would keep cash in my pocket. And if something does happen, I'm not happy, but my life's not over. We've all lost a $50 bill or a couple 20s or something like that's, and it's getting easier and easier to move between the two as well, right? Like, I did want to ask you about something. I don't know if you've dug into this yet. I just heard about these, and my jury's out. I don't know enough to have an opinion yet. But mini mints, which are using some sort of blind signatures to create basically a completely private local, like, and you could use like a localized circular economy. So there's in permaculture, we call it LETs, but it's using Satoshis. And you've got these federated mini mints, and apparently they can't really see anything. And then I don't know enough. Like, I'm comfortable saying, go ahead and use Lightning. I'm not there with this other tech yet.
Yeah. So the Fedimint idea is a really cool idea. But it's a federated model. So, Chalmian eCash and some of the early like cypherpunk ideas were brilliant because you could actually send money over the banking network without the bank actually knowing who was sending money to who. So you actually had privacy against the blind signature idea was brilliant. But the problem is that you had to get the banks on board, and the banking network was a centralized network, and the monetary unit was a centralized monetary unit. So it was permissioned, which means you just couldn't do it without them getting on board, which is what ultimately killed it, right? And it was just too easy to shut down. The remarkable thing about having a decentralized settlement and base layer monetary network is now you can do this without anybody's permission. Now you can actually set these things up, and you can use this same Chalmian, the blind signature concept, to create another payment layer, again, on top of Bitcoin, that is a federated model, but the federation itself does not have the slightest clue who is transacting with whom. So it's basically like a black box. You send your Bitcoin into this black box that's held with a multi-sig, this giant multi-sig of like 30 or 100 different businesses or whatever it is, like, a bunch of services that you use. So it's a semi-trusted relationship. It's not unlike Liquid or something, like the Liquid sidechain that Blockstream does. So it's, rather than having to trust one entity that could run away with your money, you're essentially trusting a large group of entities that and have their own individual reputations, and they have to essentially
they'd have to conspire, right?
They have to conspire, exactly. They have to conspire and be all evil together to basically cause you a problem. And all you have to do is have I think the way it works, I haven't dug into the threshold, but I think it's like a third of them can defend defend it. So like only a third of them actually need to be honest.
So if you had
I can't remember exactly. Don't quote me on that. That might be
I understand that
incorrect.
we're not sure, but if that were true, if you had 10 in a federation, you would need 8 bad actors.
Yeah.
Okay.
So but regardless, so the thing is really kind of the major security there is that they don't know who to screw. Because it's a blind signature model, they don't really know whose transactions are whose, and they don't have anything that they can reverse because it's just one big batch and they have no idea what's going on inside of it. So it's a really clever,
and then
clever
my
idea.
Understanding, let's say I came in with like 1/10 of a Bitcoin, right? Because I'm going to be acting in this group, or using this federated thing like our local bank between merchants within the bank. Basically, I'm issued a digital certificate for 0.1 Bitcoin. And if I want to exit, that digital certificate is what lets me exit and move money outside of that chain, or put it back onto the Bitcoin chain or what have you. And then it can move between my understanding also is it can move between federated mints like
Yeah.
groups of federation. It's on Lightning in between the clusters, right? It
Yeah,
sounds
the
very
thing
cool.
is those federated models can actually have massive federated channels between them, and you can
Yes.
actually have this like these 10, 20 party federations that are connected to hundreds of other federations. And Lightning Network actually is the bridge between them, and the entire thing is private and it's instantly settled.
I'll just say for
it's just
permaculture people, read chapter 14, man. I mean, it literally is that. It's automating local first, and then when you go outside to other groups that you wish to do business with next.
Yeah.
And you only go outside of, like, so you have your close network, your expanded network, and then you have, okay, if we can't do it, then and only then will we go outside. But since it's Bitcoin, it's fungible outside, because what's destroyed every local currency in history is people would only take so much of it, because if I got to pay my electric bill, I can't pay my electric bill.
Mm-hmm.
In the end, it came down to, and then like Ithaca Hours was like, well, I'm a doctor. Why isn't my hour of my time worth the same as a babysitter's time? Right. It solves all that, and it automates it at the speed of light. What do you think the biggest hurdle or drawback in Bitcoin is, and why? Like, I think a lot of times those of us who are really believers in what this is all about, people think that we don't have anything that we would change or anything that we would do differently, or we won't acknowledge that maybe there are forces in the world that aren't exactly friendly to us and that they could cause a problem.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's plenty. If you gave me a magic wand and said, like, how would you redesign Bitcoin or whatever? Sure, there's plenty of little things to fix. Like, just like there's quirks of the internet, but we're not going to be able to change IPv4 at this point, right? We're so locked in. And that's kind of the nature of a consensus model. Like, there's a little quirk on Bitcoin that you have to put in an extra 0 in the it's not the timestamp. It's like in the signature spot or something, and you just have to do it because otherwise it just doesn't work and it's pointless. But it's just there, and because it's part of the consensus, you can't undo it. It's just stuck, right? So it's kind of like it's a little bit like the Constitution in that way. It's kind of funny, is that like everything that was like a little bit wrong or needed to be fixed is still stuck there. All you could do is mark it out and do something else with it, but you couldn't remove it. You couldn't remove it without actually changing the consensus code. So there's plenty of little things that could be optimized, but the thing is that the network effect and the assurances and the unbelievable value in the security that you get from Bitcoin greatly outweighs the need to change some of those little quirks. Right now, though, if there was one thing, I talk about this on the show a lot, is when, like, I'm at my hierarchy of what I think are the most important things, it's like top of the line is monetary assurances. Like, Bitcoin is 21 million, period, end of story. Second is like hold your keys, not your keys, not your coins. Like, so custody, self-custody. And then third is privacy. And that is the one thing where I wish we had a better solution at this point. But I think maintaining the monetary assurances in the face of figuring out how to scale has kind of been the main thing right now. Like, that's been the biggest hurdle of how do we maintain this network and we grow it and we actually make this able to accommodate the whole world. And how do we do that without losing part two? Not your keys, not your coins. How do we have it so that it's still decentralized and everybody can run their own node and everybody can validate the rules for themselves? And now I think there's been a resurgence of focus on privacy. It's always been kind of like that. It's always been there in the cypherpunk ideal, is that we eventually want to get to something private. But if we don't have something decentralized, permissionless, and incorruptible, like censorship resistant, then privacy doesn't matter, right? Like, we've lost the ability to maintain the privacy down the road. So I think we have our order of operations proper. It's just we still have such a privacy concern at this day and age when it's needed for, like, the trucker convoy. And, we're in the trenches now, so to speak. We're getting into that era. And the things like Fediment, I think Lightning is a huge benefit to privacy. A lot of people kind of shit on it because you can still see, like, channel data and stuff, but really sure, like you could still see things on chain. I mean, in fact, the network itself is public. Like I broadcast which channels are mine, but the idea is that the payments are private. The payments are not stored. When I'm paying somebody, like if I pay you over Lightning or whatever, if I donated, you don't even know which node it's coming from.
No,
like,
no, I might know
really
this is Guy's node, but I don't know what payments that went through Guy's node are Guy's payments. And the bigger thing is you don't know, right? Like you can run your node and be all happy, and maybe your node ends up being in my chain of events that move my payment through because your node is connected to the right other place, and it's an expedient way for that payment to go. That's all onion routed, like, and then the onions rewrapped each handoff. So you don't even know where you are. You don't know if you're the third node in that chain or if you're the fifth. You have no idea. So literally if somebody came to you and put a gun to your head and said, we want to know if they could even see, right? Like, we want to know who did this. You can't give the answer because you don't have the information, which to me, that is the only defense against government requesting information from you, is to legitimately be able to make the statement of, I cannot give it to you because I do not have it. I can't give you what I don't have. Like if they came up with a thing where it remanded you to give a password to a laptop. They threw a guy in jail years ago for contempt of court in Colorado for months. That guy sat in jail because he wouldn't give up a password. But they knew that he knew the password, right? They knew he had the information because it was his computer. If you say to me, Jack, I want you to give me the identity of the person that made an on-chain Bitcoin payment to me, but I didn't keep a record of, I don't keep records of people's Bitcoin addresses. I don't do that. Maybe Coinbase does, but I don't. I can't tell you who sent me this $50 membership payment because I literally don't know. I know the person, but I don't know they're connected to that transaction. It's up to you to find it out.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of our, I think for me, I think one of our biggest things that holds Bitcoin back is being able to clearly and articulately explain it to people who have not done the work that you and I and many people listening to this have done to fully understand it. And I think we need better ways of explaining it than things like have fun not being poor, right? I don't know that that's or have fun being poor. Like, I don't know that that's a really great way to do that. I think there's so much, and I'll admit when I came into it, number go up is good. So like that's the original attraction. And it takes time for people to actually digest something that's completely counter to everything that they've ever been taught, that they ever know. And it's like I was saying about that one episode of your show, the smarter that person is, and the more the existing system has benefited, the more cognitive dissonance is this can't be right. But on that, I want your take on this. So I've heard a lot of the whole, we need to get away from the whole code bros type, everybody's a carnivore, everybody's a libertarian.
What are you talking about? Bullshit. It needs to go global.
Right. Like, so like the idea is we need to bring people in that are, liberals and GOP, centrist Republicans and socialists from freaking UK and all. And I'm like, money does that shit on its own over time as it matures. But what I've actually noticed is that there's a lot of people that come into the Bitcoin space and they're not, carnivore keto eaters. They're not working out, right? They're not taking care of themselves physically. They're not freedom and liberty oriented when they do. Their buddy YOLO'd into it. He's worth a lot of money and I'm going to throw some money at this. And then they put some money in it and either they make it or they don't through their first bear market. That's, that has to happen. You're going to have one. But if they do and they stick around and they start learning more, I see a lot of gravity pulling people into that. This stereotype exists because people end up there, not because they start there, is what I'm saying. I've seen a lot of this. Somebody comes into Bitcoin. Next thing you know, they're homesteading. They're putting solar on their roof. Like Brian's put solar on his roof and he's mining with his surplus. He's not making a lot of money on it, but it's worth more that way than it is selling it back to the electric company for 3 cents a kilowatt, right? They're learning about defending themselves. They're moving out of the cities and getting a little bit more rural. They're getting involved in more anarchist or libertarian, hopefully anarchist ideals. Like, hopefully it's a short flirtation with the LP if it goes there. And like the code bros thing, I think is just somebody threw that on like to spike the football because I'm not a code bro, dude. I can't. The last code I wrote was some PHP back in like 2011. I don't code anything, right? I don't. That's above me. Some of the stuff you said today is a little bit of I have to struggle to understand it. But I do think there's.
Sorry, I get jargony sometimes.
Right,
I try
that's
not
okay.
To,
but do you think there is like what do you think causes that kind of mass that pulls people into that whole space?
Man, that's a good question. That's a cultural question.
Yeah.
You know, like culture is itself like a network. It's a way to communicate. It's a language. It's a form of language, right? It's a language of values rather than an explicit language of in the context of like information and words. Where what's funny is that words can actually influence those. And words mean different things to different people. Same words, and particularly your values often inform the definition of words, like, or how you relate to those words. Like I say capitalism, it means something completely different to me than to who I'm talking to a lot of the times. And what's fundamentally different about how they view that, of course, just flatly, there's definition differences, but a lot of it's values. A lot of it is how you relate to what's important, like how you see the group versus the individual, like these sort of more fundamental things. But capital in and of itself, like money, is a powerful force for directing our understanding and evaluation of the world around us. This is why I think the culture has been poisoned, because we become a political economy. And when people are rewarded for having shallow, idiotic political whim, political values, well, then people start embracing political values because they see people get rewarded. They see people get attention. They see people, they hear it over and over and over again because right? They're designated. They get their resources to spread that culture, to influence more and more people. As Bitcoin becomes monetized, and as we go through these, spikes and crashes, the real Bitcoiners are built in the bear markets. The real Bitcoiners are built after a shit ton of red candles. When people realize what this thing really is, why it matters, and that it's here to stay. I say this all the time. Any dumbass can chase green candles. Any moron gets excited about the price rising of anything. The same person who bought Bitcoin after 30 green candles in a row would buy Dentacoin. Like they don't have to know or understand anything about it to quote unquote become a Bitcoiner and go get some Bitcoin. And they'll run screaming scared the second they have 2 red candles in a row, right? They don't understand anything. They're just hype noise. But if they get it when the price is down, then they begin to understand. And as you have this feedback loop of these higher lows, right? These new plateaus of the network effect of the growing use and liquidity of this all around the world, these massive deleveraging events where if you're paying close attention, you realize this is just a short-term credit swing. This is a credit crisis, basically. This is just a great buying opportunity. Like as you kind of step your way up to higher legitimacy and higher understanding, well, then you're having a completely different culture that gets reinforced with resources, that gets reinforced with capital reward. And you have a real economy with real signals. And you have things allocated properly. You look at the fiat system and how many insolvent fractional reserve banks, how many people working in finance are being rewarded for disgustingly irresponsible behavior, for horrible speculation, for insolvency. And when you're in your family groups and there's the guy who's in finance and he comes wearing the nicest shirts and driving the nicest car when you pull up to your family gatherings, it does a thing. It does something to their weight among your group.
Yeah.
Those people just got obliterated in Bitcoin. Those insolvent people, BlockFi froze withdrawals. Or froze their rewards. Celsius froze withdrawals. The insolvent and the irresponsible get obliterated. They might drive the nice car for a hot minute, but then that car gets repoed, right? And I think that will change the culture. When the prices are accurate, when the money is real, it will shift our values away from the things that are actually destructive, because they will be revealed as destructive. Right now, what we have is a massive economy of destructive, unprofitable businesses and models and financial insolvency appearing to look positive,
Correct.
appearing profitable, because we're papering over the losses. When we are unable to do that anymore, the culture will shift in the opposite direction, because nobody glorifies something that destroys their life. Or at least a very, very small group of people will do it, because ultimately it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If it's destructive, it will destroy itself. It's like suicide. Suicide can never really become popular because everybody just kills themselves, and then
they're not there to
it kills its own mechanism.
Right?
It's like a virus that spreads really fast and murders its host, actually kills its host rather than make it sick. Because if it kills the faster it kills the host, the faster the virus itself dies and can't replicate. What you need is to make the host sick, and you need it to survive so that it spreads the virus.
To spread the virus before the host dies. Or the
host a bad example. It sounds like
no, it's actually dead on. The host doesn't die; they become weakened in a long, prolonged state, but continue to spread. Right. So I think my approach to this question is pretty much saying the same thing, but from a different way of explaining it. And it is that I think there's two main things that happen to the mind when one examines Bitcoin enough to learn like first principles of money and understand how the fiat system actually works, what fractional reserve means, why inflation isn't what you think it is. It's not just printing money. It's a velocity of money as it moves and multiplies in the fractional system. And like when you learn all that, you're like, well, nobody taught me. You know, you got people with a degree in freaking business and like a minor in economics that don't really understand fractional reserve,
no
right?
idea.
And they're like, that really hurts the brain. But if they accept it, then they say, well, wait a minute. If I was lied to about money and banking, then maybe I was lied to about other shit. So then they start researching health and nutrition, and they realize like, oh, this food they put us on, that's the same breakdown of macros as a bag of freaking cattle feed. And maybe I shouldn't eat like a cow, because I'm not a cow and I'm not supposed to eat like a cow. And by the way, cows aren't supposed to eat like that either. Cows are supposed to eat grass. That's what a ruminant does. It ruminates on grass. Maybe I should eat the cow that eats the grass instead of eat the food that the cow eats and eat the cow that eats the bag of food, right? So that I think that opens up and that's the less intellectually sophisticated component. The more intellectually sophisticated component, it's happening to the person, but they don't even know it.
Yeah.
Our society has been built on a bleak future for a very long time. That's where the whole YOLO idea comes from, right? This idea that
it's nihilism.
Screw the future, live for today, right?
Yeah.
And an inflationary monetary system creates that. And if you look at all the richest people in the world, they're all in debt up to their eyes on purpose, because the system's actually designed. If you have enough money and you leverage it the right way, you can live like that forever and never run out of money and never pay any taxes, right? So it's all built on that. But then all the peons, like they try to participate in that system, and it's very parasitic, and they get drained of their blood, their life force. They're like the sick host you described, right? So they have no hope in the future. They discover Bitcoin, and then they discover the concept of something called savings, right? Not just investing, because investing, we all kind of in our mind, we make this mindset of if it's an investment, it's a risk. Like even across time, like I could do this for 20 years and it could still not pay off. When you look at Bitcoin, you go mathematically, unless a meteor hits the planet or something, this is going to be the money of the future. So my money's safer. Then so you start thinking about tomorrow. And now you start thinking about next year. And then you start thinking in 5 years. And it has a huge cascading effect, because one thing you do is like, well, like, yeah, I got to think about my future, and my grandkids and my great grandkids. So old men start planting trees under whose shade they know they will never sit. So they start thinking about multi-generation, but they also think like, well, I want to be here to see as much of this cool shit as possible. So like, then they start thinking about their health, right? And then if they start taking that journey, they start looking into all of the corruption around the food industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and they go down that rabbit hole, right? And they end up living in the rabbit hole. Like you can't unsee it. It's a matrix experience, but it all really starts with, I'm actually now hopeful for my future. Because if you want to know why people kill themselves, they have no hope that tomorrow will be better than today.
They have no hope that tomorrow will be better than today, and they feel like they have no control over changing that.
Every day I wake up will be the worst day of my life, right? Peter from Office Space, right? Like every day will be the worst day I've ever had. It will never get any better. And the balance of keeping this like loose federation of slaves together is to make them feel like that just enough that they don't kill themselves, that they stick around sick, fat, lazy, and unhealthy. But when that person separates from that and starts saying, hey, like, it doesn't matter that I'm 50. I could start lifting some iron again, right? And starts thinking about tomorrow, then everything's up for grabs. And I think that's why we gravitate to this place, because then it's like, well, all I want is the freedom to like have some animals in my backyard. What do you mean I can't do that? They never wanted to, so they didn't even know that they weren't allowed to.
And so somebody was going to get mad at them for it, right?
All people need is one thing they want to do that seems completely reasonable to them, that they should be able to, and then be told you can't do it because somebody else said you can't do it. And they're like, whoa, wait a minute. All of a sudden, this affects me, right? People that watch that shit happen to other people their whole lives, and they're like, that's okay. That's okay. Who would want to do that anyway? Oh, wait, I want to do something I can't do? Maybe the system's a problem. And I think that's how we end up there.
Yeah. And it's funny too, like, I kind of going back to the yuppie elite idea, is that it's all a matter of, it's really all founded in trust. Is that we're groomed. We're literally led from the very beginning in the public school system and everything to trust and believe that someone else has the answer, that it's in the right textbook. It's not something to discover. It's something to be told, and that you're supposed to listen to the person who is the authority. You're supposed to do exactly what your teacher says. And if they can't explain it, it doesn't matter. That's the answer because the teacher has it. It's the expert who has the answer. It's the right politician who has the answer. And they are the source rather than discovery, rather than critical thinking. And when you start to develop this, it's basically a learned dependency of do not have confidence in yourself. Do not think through things yourself. Here is a list of things you were supposed to remember, and here are the people who tell you what those things are supposed to be. And memorize it, regurgitate it. Memorize it, regurgitate it. And you do this for long enough, and then people just go looking for, where's the answer? Who's the expert that has the answer for me? And
that it exists.
Make your first, it's like a revival. Right. It's like an inner revolution. There's like this enlightenment when you realize that you were lied to about money.
Yeah.
You're like, so you've suddenly, it's this feeling of incredible self-empowerment that you figured this shit out, that you found the answer in spite of the person who told you what it was because they were wrong. And your trust in that model, your trust in the dependency that was supposed to be keeping you safe cracks. And then you start looking around because now you've taken 2 steps back away from this frame of reality that you were in. And now you can look at the actual nature of the frame. Now you can kind of look outside the side of the painting and look at the wall that it's sitting on. And you're like, dude, this wall is like rotten. There's there's other things wrong with this.
Yeah.
And then you keep stepping back further and further, and it's so funny. The writing is on the wall everywhere. Like the obviousness of some of the things that we're lied about is incredible. Like the fact that corn and grain makes us fat.
Yeah.
That it's incredibly unhealthy for us. We know these things. Like farmers, like they know these things. In fact, like there's a delicacy in France with ducks where they induce fatty liver disease by force feeding them a bunch of corn and grain. They literally put a pipe down because the duck won't eat it. They put a pipe down their gullet and they just shove a bunch of corn and grain and carbs into the ducks for months and months and months. And then when you kill the duck to eat them, their livers are disgusting. Or well, delicious, exactly. But their livers are insanely unhealthy. They literally induce fatty liver disease.
Yeah.
So that because it's a delicacy. It's delicious. Everybody loves fat. but that's how you do it. And then you do that same thing with kids with cereal in the morning, and you put sugar on it and all this
and
stuff.
apple
But
juice.
somehow it's heart healthy for us.
Yeah.
But like it's the exact same thing. We do this so many times. It's what we do. The cattle, like over and over and over again, you see this same crap. We know what these things do, but when the experts say otherwise, which are actually just science funded by marketing, funded by incumbents that have political power to make sure that they can't be undermined from a cultural perspective, these systems of power feed back on themselves, and everybody just trusts the loudest political voice.
Agreed.
And it leads to incredible corruption. It leads to the proliferation and sustainability of lies for decades and decades. And it's funny how much of that will fall away when we fix the money.
You know, what I think of when you say that, another one of Michael Saylor's interviews, and how the elite know what they're doing and how they cure it in their own, elite prodigy with education. Because what you just said is a lesson that most people never experience. They never experience it, especially, and I don't mean to pick on people, the whole generational thing, but the younger generation really believes there is an answer. We already know everything, and there is an answer. And once you know the answer, you just do that thing and don't worry about it anymore, right? So what Saylor said when he went to MIT, all of a sudden, instead of being the smartest kid in the classroom, he's surrounded by other people just as smarter than him. Like they were all the smartest kids in their classroom before they were all in this room together. Yeah. And this professor walks out with one of the tiles from the Challenger space shuttle that burned up on reentry. And doesn't say, hello, my name is Mr. So-and-so, or Professor So-and-so, or Dr. So-and-so. Says, so that's what this is. It is your job as a class to figure out what went wrong. Puts it down on the desk and sits down and says not a word. And they all look at each other like, holy shit. And then he said, you realize in this exercise, you're not going to get the answer. At this point, that NASA had not figured it out yet. A whole bunch of people that sat at the desk you were in that went through all of the things you're about to do in the next 4 years, and some of them longer, that went to work for NASA, they all already looked at this, and they all already don't know the answer. There is no place in a book to get this answer. You're not going to stick your hand up and give a 5-word answer and get a star. And so it broke that thinking that there was an answer. And the fact that when if you think what it takes to get into MIT, right? Like how hard that is. Like that's like a lesson that's designed like, well, we'll save our own in time because they end up coming through mostly the same funnel. And that they have to learn, hey, if you want to be one of the overlords, you have to not think like a peon anymore. And I think Bitcoin gives that lesson like an MIT teacher does. It's like, here it is. And now it's up to you. Can you see it or do you fall out? Like, do you say, I can't accept this? Because I think that's the biggest thing holding Bitcoin back to me is that if I sit down and talk to you, let's say you're hugely overweight, right? And I say, look, you need to stop eating Twinkies and Ho-Hos and Ding Dongs and bread, right? And you need to eat like ribeyes and broccoli and stop drinking booze, at least until you lose the weight because it interferes with the process and you need to get healthy. And it's not that hard. And if I gave you $1 million to eat ribeyes for 6 months, you would do it. Like the reason you don't want to do it isn't that you don't believe it'll work. It's because you don't want to do it. Yeah. Because accepting that it's true require you to be responsible for it. And I think there's this internal thing that if I accept Bitcoin for what it is, I'm going to start thinking about my spending. Like 10 years ago when I wanted to buy something, I've done well financially my whole life. Like if I had enough money to buy the thing without altering my life today, I went and bought the thing. Now when I want to buy a thing, I'm like, well, how many sats is that?
Yeah.
Right. And I don't think people subconsciously anyway want to make that. They don't want to go to the gym every day. You know what I mean? Like it's the same phenomenon. Like I know I'd be better off if I did, but that's hard.
It's all varying degrees of responsibility and varying scopes of what you're responsible for. And I think this is something that a lot of people don't think about is that like you want to think that freedom is just having things that you like. But there's a whole subset of society that thinks that they're free because like freedom is getting healthcare from the government for free. Like that's freedom. Freedom is the exact opposite of that. Freedom is responsibility. To be free means that you are responsible for everything in your life, which also means you're not dependent on anyone else. which means that you actually have the scope to solve it. If you're dependent on somebody else and they're wrong, or they're incompetent, or they're corrupt, you're
You have a
screwed.
problem. Yeah.
Because you're not free to choose. You're not free to make your own decision or figure out your own solution or to trust somebody else. You're forced into subservience. Freedom is responsibility. They are literally one and the same. We have a pandemic of subservience. We have a pandemic of generations that are afraid, desperately afraid of being responsible for anything in their lives. And it's learned. It's taught. It's the desire not to grow up.
Yeah.
And
well, there's a lot of that.
We're moving into a world where we're beginning to see the consequences of failing to do that. What happens when nobody grows up? What happens when nobody takes responsibility and everybody just becomes dependent on the next guy? And the beautiful thing about a trustless money is that you can actually rebuild trusted relationships again. You can take out the element of corruption. You can take out the fact that your medium, your language to communicate economically with these other people can be corrupted in and of itself, such that you and I can't trust each other because the mechanism we're using to communicate might be fucked anyway, already. And when that is stable, we can actually build a relationship again. We can actually start working with businesses and have family doctors that we have for our entire life, because the money is real. The communication that we are having from an economic standpoint tells us something meaningful about the economy. And we actually weigh our decisions. What it costs to go do something now matters. It's critical that it matters. The fact that it ever didn't is frightening. you know?
Yeah.
And
I mean, I wouldn't say it would end corruption, but it makes corruption have a cost.
No,
the big problem we have with,
that's what I mean.
right? The big problem we have with corruption right now is that corruption is free, right? And what I mean by it being, I don't mean it doesn't cost anybody else anything. I mean that, like, if I'm the guy that wants to peddle influence and I'm close to the faucet, I have an unlimited budget to corrupt my fellow man with. And I can basically steal Guy Swann's fiat money value through printing more money to buy the influence. Or bureaucrats have so much power now that they can buy influence without actually spending any direct money. So if you had real hard money and if I want to pay off Guy Swan, I actually have to sacrifice the money that I'm giving to Guy to buy you off, right? I can't just go, hey, let somebody else pay him. Because think about that. I mean, not only is it like very tempting to use corruption if it works, but if it has no actual cost to you, you're not going to get fired. You're not going to get voted out of office. You're not going to go to prison. And it doesn't even have to be your money, and you can buy influence.
Yeah.
Well, maybe there's 10% of people in the world that have enough integrity to fight that off, I guess,
That's probably a high estimate.
Yeah, I'm saying, man, I don't know if you gave me that much power. I'd like to believe that I would not corrupt, but you'd have to be tempted, man.
You'd only know yourself after you were put to the test.
Yeah, I don't even want that. See, I think I think the way people really can gauge whether they have any chance, does having that much power even scare you? Like, I don't want a high level political office. I don't want to have Jeff Bezos's money. I don't want it. I don't want that much power. And I think that there's very few people that would actually, well, I don't know. Maybe there's more people than I think. I hope so. What do you think about this whole idea that people keep saying Bitcoin is an inflation hedge? Because, it's also like incredibly volatile, right? And I think volatile is subjective, because if you look at it over time, it's pretty volatile and a continued upward trend, but there is swings back and forth. So I don't know that we help ourselves if we use that phrase, at least not without an explanation to go along with it.
Yeah, unfortunately, that one comes with caveats, because people are thinking we're coming from an economy where everybody thinks in the short term.
Yeah.
So it's easy to think that somebody they dunked on us because Bitcoin fell when there's inflation, right?
Yeah.
But probably the better way to think, actually, this is the last episode on the show. Pierre Richard had a really great little article on it called "The Utility of Saving," and it's about monetary or supply assurances, the cost of having a consistent, predictable, unchangeable supply is having an unpredictable price.
Okay.
It's volatility. If you want something that's not volatile, that's perfectly stable from a monetary perspective, well, then you're only going to get that by manipulating the supply. That's the only way to artificially get that. The appearance of stability is done by destroying the monetary assurances and thus making it corrupt. And in the long term, in the short term, maybe you can make it appear stable, but in the long term, it's dead. It's going to zero, right? Your risk is total loss. But the price, the cost of qualitative assurances that the money is the fact that you can't do anything about the price when it is adjusting to reality, when you have a credit crisis, when you have too many people over leveraged in the economy and they've all collateralized it with Bitcoin. Well, they're all going to have to sell that Bitcoin to fix their collateral, right? Or to pay for their leveraged events. They're all going to get margin called.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly during a monetization event, a network that is growing viciously, a new monetary good that's being discovered and that most people still don't have the slightest clue how to relate to it. They don't understand it. They just see price go up and they buy a green candle. You know what I mean? Like the same old thing. Well, you're going to get massive volatility because the information in the market is incomplete. Like the market has no idea. It's still in the discovery phase of what the hell a Bitcoin even is. So the volatility is going to be even more exaggerated. But the long-term fix to this, you look out long enough and it's simply that volatility decreases with liquidity. The faster, the more it grows and the more embedded it becomes and the more it's used to settle payments internationally and for remittances and for retail payments, and the more trading there is and the more actual settled Bitcoin transactions and not paper transactions that are done, the more stable it is. And it's become less and less volatile even today. Even today, you look at it through history, the volatility of Bitcoin has continued to decrease. It has these spikes, but those spikes, the volatility has lower highs while the price has higher lows. So it's just a matter of time.
6 years ago, let's say I was a Bitcoin billionaire 6 years ago at about $1 billion USD value of Bitcoin, and I decided I'm not. No, I wasn't. No. I'm saying
no. I know. I'm just saying. Right. I'm just imagining $1 billion in Bitcoin then.
Right. Just say hypothetically, right? And then I decided, well, I'm done with this game. I'm not going to be betting on the next sucker. I'm going to get out. And so I decided to not completely collapse an exchange. I'm going to split my Bitcoin up to $100 million packets, put them on 10 of the biggest exchanges at the time, and sell $1 billion worth of Bitcoin in a week. That would have had a massive impact on the price of Bitcoin. Like it would have cratered it. Yeah. You know, you can have a big sell-off and it brings the price down like we just had. But if one person were to sell just $1 billion worth of Bitcoin randomly, you know, and it's not dogpiled down with a bunch of others, it doesn't even move the needle anymore. Yeah. And I'm really interested in this new model.
In the middle of a day.
I don't know who put this new model out, and it's always easy to reverse engineer a model. It doesn't mean it carries forward into the future, but I'm sure you've seen the model that's made up of this series of circles in the graph that shows the volatility and the overall upward trend. Mm-hmm. And it's basically, if I had to sum it up to somebody that hasn't seen it, number go up, circle get smaller, right? So the circle is the volatility, right?
Yeah.
And then the price volatility is actually contained in smaller and smaller circles across the entire life of Bitcoin. And it actually fits and it scales beautifully. Like, that does not mean it will go forward, but it actually, what I've said about it is it makes logical, consistent sense that this is actually what would happen as a network effect adoption of this happen. The volatility will decline, and it's still, it doesn't feel good when you're the one doing it. It doesn't feel good when you bought it 68,000 because Elon Musk said to or whatever, right? Like, but if you're always DCAing in, and I know you're a big fan of that approach as well, to get to a point where you don't care anymore. Like, you know, when you become a hodler is when you're not going refresh on the price 57 times a day. When, you know, like, you know, no one does that with their 401k. Nobody does that with their house, but they buy Bitcoin or some other shit crypto. And it's like refresh. refresh. And
F5, F5.
it's yeah. Or people say like it went down, so I had to sell. What?
That doesn't.
Like, it's not like, okay, so at the same time it went down, my wife got cancer, so I had to sell. Okay, that I feel for you. That sucks. I'm sorry that happened. But people that like made it like they had to because it went down. Well, if it had doubled, would you have sold it? No, then you didn't have to.
Yeah.
Like it's a weird thing, but I guess it's an inflation hedge across the right time horizon.
It's all about time horizon. It really is.
What
like
isn't
even
an
back in
inflation?
2013,
Yeah,
with I'd had friends or whatever, and like during that spike in the price or whatever, it's so funny. Like it was all hyped up, and I'd have some friends be like, "So when are you selling? Like when are you getting out and you getting cash or whatever?" And I would
never
tell them it's like, I'm not, like, Bitcoin is my exit. Like I'm not selling, and they didn't understand. It was a stock to them. It was a trade, and that was it. And I'm like, no, I'm literally, I want to move everything over to Bitcoin. I don't know how long that takes, but I'm going to slowly and incrementally make my life a Bitcoin life, period. I'm just trying to end my use. I'm exiting fiat. However I can do that, I'm doing that. Sorry, I kind of interrupted you. What were you about to say?
No, that's fine. No, I've had a long time, and I want to be respectful of your time here. But if we could hit a few comments from the audience here.
Sure.
If you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm a little tight. I got like 5-10 minutes left.
Okay, well then
you make him wrap it up.
Go slow. Go fast on them. Thoughts on Bitcoin and podcasting being catalyst to launch the high first turning that follows the current crisis fourth turning.
Thoughts on Bitcoin and podcasting being catalysts. So you're meaning like from a societal, like fourth turning perspective?
That's what they're asking. Yeah, basically.
Asking? Okay.
Is the next generation the strong men to replace the weak ass, soft ass men we have right now?
Yeah, without a doubt. Well, going back to the idea of freedom is responsibility, it's putting you back in charge. Like Bitcoin, there's something really amazing about holding your own keys for the first time. To anybody who actually does it, is you realize that, like, holy shit, I have this and nobody else has it. And in the monetary world, in the financial world, that's never the case. Everything is permissioned. Everything is a trusted network. And when you hold your Bitcoin for the first time, like this is my freaking Bitcoin. Holy crap, I could lose it. Like I could do something wrong, and it's scary. But the reason it's scary is because it's real. It's because it's actual responsibility that you have taken on. And in the same way, like you look at podcasting, podcasting is you sourcing your own information. Podcasting is not owned. There's no platform for podcasting. Podcasting is an open RSS feed system on any and all platforms. I'm not locked into the one app that I want to use. I have a bunch of different podcasting apps, and I just choose whichever one I feel like using today. But the same podcasts are on all of them. RSS feeds are open.
Yeah. It's a protocol.
Yeah, exactly. It's a protocol. And there's immense power in kind of taking charge of your life, and it's a teaching moment. Like I said, there's a personal enlightenment when you realize you've been lied to, when you discover something yourself for the first time, when you take responsibility for something. And there's a feedback loop there when you realize that you're in control of one thing in your life, but then you see everywhere where you're not in control, where you're totally dependent, where you're screwed if something goes wrong based on someone else's decision. You start to root those things out. You start to look for your own answers. You start to take responsibility in those areas of your life. You mature, you grow up, you become a fucking adult. And that's what we need.
We do.
And fourth turnings are when you realize the consequences of staying a child your whole life. And you gotta wake the hell up, and you gotta do something about it. So
I want to make sure you see
either do that or die.
Yeah. I want to make sure you see this comment, because this is your payday for the day, Guy. JC Pocket says, I'm a very liberal Bitcoin supporter. Guy Swan is how I learned about money. Bitcoin is for everyone. I no longer identify as a liberal.
JC's my boy. Love that guy. JC is full of gold. You got to follow him on Twitter.
All right. So you guys know about it. I want to let you go because It has been a long one. But I think that this is one of the best interviews I've done, especially about Bitcoin.
Thank you.
And so it was fantastic having you here today, Guy. If you ever want to come on and talk about anything again, or is there anything I can ever do for you or my community, can you just let us know and we'll do that. Thank you for giving us almost 2 hours of your time. I know it's valuable.
Yeah.
And you want to tell people how to find you? Like where they need to go to get more Guy? Because a lot of people are like, man, who is this guy? He's the guy.
The guy. And I've read more about Bitcoin than anybody else you know.
I believe that's a true statement, by the way.
Oh, it's true. It's true at this point. I got the proof of work, baby. I got 14 audiobooks. I got almost 700 reads on the show. Like it's stacking up there, man. I'm going for that. You know, they say 10,000 hours makes you a master.
Yeah.
I feel like I've got to have like 4,000 to 5,000 hours of possibly recorded Bitcoin audio, you know,
I think so.
Like just like solid stuff. So we'll see. But I'm going for 10,000. I'll get there.
All right.
But yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at the Guy Swan. I just post about Bitcoin, libertarianism, that sort of stuff. Philosophy, cypherpunk philosophy. It's my fun stuff. And I read and discuss and learn and share about everything about Bitcoin, about its history, about why it should exist, why we needed it, why we need it still, the macro financial situation, economics. Like I said, I'm an Austrian economics nerd. Some of my favorite stuff is like the 20 or 30 years of cypherpunk and cryptography history before it led to Bitcoin, because there's so much just gold. I talk about internet history, obviously. I mean, I talked about it a lot in this. And my show, the podcast, is Bitcoin Audible. And then also we've got Shitcoin Insider, which is few and far between, but we just recorded an episode the other day. And so that show is not done. It's just kind of like our guilty pleasure to dump on a lot of the obnoxious stuff in crypto. But it's a fun show. It's a fun show.
I agree.
But yeah, Bitcoin Audible is the main thing. And the Guy Swan on Twitter. Swan is 2 N's, by the way.
Well, folks can get by either the bitcoinbreakout.com or the survivalpodcast.com. Look up this episode, and I will have links to all of your stuff in the show notes.
Ooh, who am I following? Yeah. Who am I following?
I wanted to ask
Corey Clipston. Corey Clipston. Follow him. He's the guy who runs. He's CEO of Swann Bitcoin. He's been amazing at calling out all the shit that's like been blowing up in crypto. He's called out Celsius, called out like UST and Luna, like before these things blew up. He is a resource. They're Gigi. I'm a huge fan of Gigi. He has some incredible writing. He's got another book coming out. Knut von Holm. I'm reading, or we're waiting for confirmation on his 3rd audiobook that I just did with him. Saifedean. I mean, there's a bunch of good ones. Those are just off the top of my head, but look at my follow list. I follow. that's who I'm interested in Bitcoin right now.
Very cool, man. Well, hey, again, thanks for being with us today. And again, GuySwan.com, BitcoinAudible.com, The Guy Swan at Twitter. I will make sure there's links to all of those in the show notes on both websites for today's episode. Thank you again for being with us, Guy.
Yeah, man, for sure. I appreciate it. Had a good ass time.